Now, as Donald Trump is expected to address the watch party in West Palm Beach, the ex-president's supporters have gathered in large numbers.
They're singing, they're dancing with joy, jumping up and down with throwing their MAGA hats in air every chance they get to celebrate. This is Trump is pushing closer to victory over Harris. U.S. media called North Carolina and then Georgia, two of the 7 swing states for the Republican candidate. He's leading in 5 other battleground states, narrowing Harris's path to victory.
On the other hand, mood has darkened at the Democratic Watch Party, especially after Harris's camp said she will not be addressing her supporters.
His transition team has done.
And just as we were speaking, breaking news coming in. Fox News becomes the first U.S. news station to call U.S. elections. Fox News says Donald Trump is the projected winner in the U.S. presidency race.
Absolutely. Now, this is the latest breaking news that we are getting. Donald Trump is expected to address his supporters shortly, as we stated before. Associated Press is yet to call the elections as results continue to pour in, which shows the path to victory or Democrat candidate Kamala Harris narrows.
So, of course, this is the latest. Fox News being the first to call the U.S. election, projecting a victory for Donald Trump in U.S. presidential elections 2024. However, Associated Press, it's yet to call the elections. The results continue to pour in. We've been bringing you the latest results. The tally at the moment is 248 for Harris's 214. That's the electoral votes. It shows that the path to victory for Democrat candidate Kamala Harris is narrowing.
Absolutely.
She didn't even address her own supporters. We want her to call President Trump. She didn't talk to the people who were assembled there for hours.
Of course, the mood in the Democratic headquarters is quite somber. We've also heard that Kamala Harris has said that she will not be addressing her supporters tonight. However, Trump, on the other hand, he is going to seize the moment. He will be addressing his supporters.
Absolutely. And we saw the visuals as well, the supporters singing, dancing with joy as they are celebrating Trump as he's pushing closer to victory over Harris. Now, U.S. media called North Carolina and Georgia 2 of 7 swing states for the candidate. And he is, of course, as of now, leading in the other 5 battleground states as well, narrowing Harris's path to victory as of now.
All right, the other 5 states that we're talking about, it's Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, it's Arizona and Nevada. Pennsylvania being the biggest battleground with its 19 electoral votes. Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, they've been in the red for quite a while now. These are where the Republicans are leading. So that could be a big win. Earlier, Harris was leading in 2 of these 3 blue wall states, but at the moment, it's completely in the lead for in the red for Trump.
Right, and that was the blue wall states. While we have, of course, the Sun Belt states, of course, where Nevada and Arizona are still be counted for, but Trump is leading. For now, Australian Prime Minister has also congratulated Trump already. Now, Fox News, as we said, is the first media to call on Trump. Of course, they have projected Trump to win the U.S. presidency.
Right, and just as we were speaking, Fox News being the first to call the U.S. election, and congratulatory messages already beginning to pour in. The first one coming from Scott Morrison from Australia, of course, and we will be seeing more congratulatory messages pour in as well. As of now, what we do know is that AP has not called in the election right now, but as per Fox News, it has called in the U.S. election. It's projected a win for Donald Trump.
And U.S. media, of course, is also they're projecting a win for Trump in Pennsylvania. Of course, AP is still waiting on that. And if you look at the percentage points of where it stands, if we go by AP, 95% of the votes have been counted.
All right, for more on this, we are now being joined by Ambassador Arun Singh, live from New Delhi. Thank you so much for joining us on WION World is One, sir. Of course, I'm sure you've heard us. The results have poured in. Fox News has called the U.S. election. In fact, we're still waiting for the Associated Press. It's seeming to be a win for Donald Trump. I just want to understand, what do you think Donald Trump's presidency would mean for India?
So, as you indicated, the trends are clear, although the results have not been called by some of the news agencies. But the trend is clear. And as far as India is concerned, broadly, we should be okay. Because in Trump 1.0, for instance, there were several dimensions through which the relationship had consolidated. Soon after taking over in 2018, for instance, Trump had put India on STA level 1, what is called Strategic Trade Authorization level 1, for highest level of technology releases on a par with the NATO partners of the US. He had also invited the Indian Prime Minister for an official visit in the middle of 2017. And then he revived the Quad, which had been lying dormant since 2007. The arrangement of India, US, Australia, and Japan to coordinate more to deal with the challenges in the Indo-Pacific, to deal with the challenges from China, and as a signal to India. Earlier it was referred to as the Asia-Pacific. He said now we'll have an Indo-Pacific strategy. And the Hawaii-based Pacific Command was renamed the Indo-Pacific Command. And in 2020, for example, when we had the crisis in Galwan, at that time, from what came out in the public domain, US had shared information, intelligence with India, had leased 2 drones to India, and had also shared some winter clothing that were urgently needed by our troops. So in many ways, the relationship had consolidated during Trump. But there were challenges. There were challenges on the trade front, because that's one area where Trump was very, very aggressive. He had criticized India repeatedly for having high tariffs. He had imposed tariffs on steel and aluminum imports from India, citing national security grounds, but we are a strategic partner, so that didn't make sense. He removed benefits for a certain category of Indian products that were going to US tariff-free under the GSP. He removed that. And then the 2 countries had discussed for a long time to do a limited trade agreement, and they couldn't work that out. Right. So trade was an area of difficulty, which we will need to handle.
Right, now we were talking about the India-US ties. Now, let's also talk about the Indian diaspora in US. What does, if Trump is being projected as the winner, what does it mean for the Indian diaspora? You've been an ambassador to the US. Now, if you look at the Indians there, they are looking for representation as they've become a very important voter group there. What does a Trump win mean for that diaspora?
So clearly, it is an important voter group. The size of the diaspora now is estimated to be about 5.2 million, and 2.6 million are US citizens, so part of the voting category. In several states, their presence is larger than the size by which presidential candidates win those states. So it's a significant win. But Trump has been making determined efforts to reach out to the Indian origin diaspora since his campaign in 2016. You will recall at that time in October, he had addressed a rally of the Indian American community in New Jersey. He had recorded a campaign video at that time, following on the campaign video in 2014 that the Indian Prime Minister had done, where he said, "Ab ki baar Trump Sarkar," so trying to reach out to the community. And so as a result of that, the efforts he's been making, in 2016, for example, 80% of the Indian American vote had gone to Hillary Clinton. In 2020, 70% of the Indian American vote went to Joe Biden. But this year, according to the pre-poll indications and surveys, only about 60% were going towards Kamala Harris, despite her being partly a person of Indian origin. So Trump has been making inroads into this community, which is also impacted, like other communities, by concerns about the economy, about jobs, about inflation, about illegal migration. And then there have been some members of the Indian American community who work closely with him. Vivek Ramaswamy is one. The wife of the next vice president potentially is a person of Indian origin. So there are persons of Indian origin who have influence in the orbit around him. So I think broadly the Indian American community is maturing, it's coming of age. It has influence in the economy. There are so many CEOs of major companies who are of Indian origin. But across the aisle, they are beginning to have influence in administration and in politics.
Now, Ambassador, of course, we're talking about the impact it will have on India. Let's also talk about the global geopolitical landscape, which has seen a lot of volatility. We are seeing two wars at the moment, Russia, Ukraine, the war in West Asia. Now, Trump has reiterated multiple times that when he is in office, he will end the wars on day one. That's what he's been saying. What's your assessment of that, sir?
So let's see how it plays out. Now, clearly, on the Russia-Ukraine war, I think politically he will be in a position different from Joe Biden to try and bring an end to the active phase of the conflict. In Trump 1.0, he was less adversarial towards Russia than the Biden-Harris administration has been. And he was less sympathetic towards the Ukrainian leadership. So he will be in a position to draw attention to the fact that US has already given more than $100 billion worth of economic and military assistance to Ukraine for this conflict. It has gone on for a year and a half. The momentum on the ground does not seem to be favoring Ukraine. So he can call for an end to the active phase of the conflict. So that's possible. And that certainly will be beneficial for India. Because if there's less of an adversarial approach between US and Russia, then India's own economic, political defense relations with Russia will not come under any kind of a controversial gaze in US or in the West. As far as West Asia is concerned, we'll have to see how it plays out, because Trump would be even more supportive of Israel than Biden has been. And that's been his consistent message. In Trump 1.0, for instance, he moved the US embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, which is what Israelis had been wanting and no US government had done. He unilaterally recognized Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights. And then he said recently, he's calling upon Israel to do on the ground whatever it takes. So we have to say whether the government of Prime Minister Netanyahu feels more emboldened as a result of a Trump victory. And today Netanyahu, as you've seen, has fired the defense minister, who was seen as a person who was, wanting to slow things down in terms of the active conflict that was going on. So if he feels more emboldened, wants to continue with the action in Gaza or in Lebanon, then how do other Arab countries react? Or what does Iran do? Iran will certainly expect that it will come under greater pressure under Trump. So how does that affect the dynamic between Iran and the Arab countries? So on this, I think there's an element of uncertainty at this stage. But I think that the third theater, which is the China theater, given what had happened in Trump 1.0, in terms of how Trump had articulated approach to China in the national security strategy they had brought out, of the national defense strategy, they will see China as their main economic, technological and military challenge and define their strategy accordingly, which again, I think from India's point of view will not be unhelpful.
Right. Let me go back to our earlier section of talking about the dynamics in U.S. You talked about how Trump was able to gain and represent the diaspora in politics, as well as, J.D. Vance's wife being in Indian origin as well. Do you somewhere feel like Harris was not able to do it because she as well is from an Indian origin?
Well, I think if 60% of the Indian origin community voted, was likely to vote for her, then she was certainly able to do to some extent. But perhaps not as much as many would have expected, given the fact that she was a person partially of Indian origin. But as other analysts have pointed out, I think the Indian American community is also being impacted by issues that other communities are being impacted by, related to economy, jobs and immigration. Again, from the pre-poll surveys, a significant part of the African American male voter was not going to vote for Kamala Harris. And she, again, is a person of African-American origin. And a significant part of the Latino male voter was not going to vote for Kamala Harris, even though as a minority community, one would expect that they would support another person who was seen as a minority community candidate. So I think there were certain trends in US voting assessment and voting public that went beyond ethnic identity, which certainly impacted on all sections.
Right. And now, Prime Minister Modi, of course, has been he's been traveling to U.S. and he was there when Trump was there as well. How do you reckon the relationship there?
Well, they had a good relationship. And, if I remember right, in 2016, for example, soon after Trump had been elected, Prime Minister Modi had spoken to him after his inauguration. He had visited the US in 2017. Then again, if you recall, in 2019, when there was a big rally for the Indian Prime Minister, the Howdy Modi rally in Houston, where there were 50,000 Indian Americans present. In a very unusual way, President Trump went to that rally. And very unusual for a US president to go for an event which is welcoming a visiting foreign leader. And not only did he go there, he spoke there, he stayed on for more than an hour through the speech of the Indian Prime Minister, and after that they went around the stadium holding hands. And then he visited India in February 2020, and there was a big event for him in Ahmedabad, where there were 100,000 people present. So I think they, despite some of the differences related to trade issues, they had built up clearly a good personal rapport framework for interaction and cooperation, which had enabled the relationship to consolidate. So I'm sure they'll be able to take it up from that point and build it up further.
Right, Ambassador, as we were discussing earlier, let's just go back to the numbers that are coming in from the United States. It's still at 248 for Trump, 214 for Harris. Now, what we're also seeing that there's a very clear red wave. And or even the blue wall states, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Trump is leading there as well. Where do you think perhaps Kamala Harris's campaign lacked when it came to connecting with the voters?
I think it is several reasons, as some of the issues as we discussed earlier, that most of the reports coming in is that in large parts of the country and large parts of the voting public, over the last 4 years, they saw their wages rise less than the rise in prices. So that certainly impacted. There were not as many jobs going around that people were looking for. And although the Biden-Harris administration did try to kickstart manufacturing in the US through the Chips and Sciences Act, the Infrastructure Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, but all these things take time to play out on the ground. So the impact was not there. Second, again, pre-poll surveys showed that more than 70% of the American public felt that the country was not headed in the right direction. So clearly that will reflect on the current administration. And Kamala Harris was very much a part of the current administration, even though normally vice presidents do not really play a big role in determining policy. It is the president that plays that role. And again, because Kamala Harris had been nominated by Joe Biden to take over the candidature once he pulled out, she felt obliged not to criticize him or not to criticize his policies. And in fact, at one of the TV appearances, she was asked, what would you do differently if you had the chance in the last 4 years? And she said, not very much differently.
Right.
But in other content, she said that, it would be a Kamala Harris presidency, it would be different. But she could not distance herself from Joe Biden as much as was necessary to counter this negative assessment of how the administration had done in the last 4 years. So I think all these things played out on how the voting went. But
right.
it's perhaps just built into the situation.
Right. Now, of course, as the numbers come in, there are reactions that are pouring in from across the globe as well, congratulatory messages. China, in fact, has reacted. It says it hopes for peaceful coexistence with the United States as Trump is on the brink of victory. What do you have to say about that?
Well, it's a very standard, normal reaction. They couldn't have said very much else.
All right. But that being said, when we talk about wars, and you've mentioned this earlier as well, we're not just talking about what's happening outside of the United States. We're also talking about the US-China trade war, the chips war. What is your assessment of that? If there is a if Trump does win, what is your assessment of that, sir? So
at one level, one would expect that the technology restrictions related to China will continue. The pushback on Chinese, subsidizing of manufacturing, building excess capacity, stealing intellectual property, all that will continue. But we have to watch because, Trump has been erratic and unpredictable in his decision making, as we saw in Trump 1.0. Despite the very strong posture they had taken related to China, in 2019, when he met Chinese President Xi, as was revealed in a book written by his national security advisor, John Bolton, he said to him that if you buy more farm produce from the Midwest states, which will be helpful to me politically, then I'll ease up on my pressure on China. And then in January 2020, he did a limited trade agreement with China, which the Chinese had no intention of implementing, because he wanted to sell that politically for his own purposes. And again, for example, in terms of banning the Chinese app TikTok, while the Biden administration has tried to move towards banning the app, one of the big supporters of Trump is said to have a major investment in TikTok and the Chinese company that owns TikTok, ByteDance. And therefore, Trump may not go in the same direction that Biden had done. So we'll have to see how his personal preferences, how his political compulsions, his assessment of political compulsions sort of intermingle with how he wants to define US strategy. Because the other thing is that if he shows himself as accommodating Russia in Europe, he will want to project that in another theater he's taking a very strong posture. Because that's what the US public would expect from their president. And he may select China as the theater where he's showing strength, even as he's accommodating in Europe. So I think these conflicting assessments, pulls and pressures will play out. But we won't really know till he's in government, till the administration around him is in place. Again, several of the books brought out by people who work closely with him have pointed out to the huge infighting that was going on in his administration when he was there, and which resulted in contradictory decisions being taken from time to time.
Well, Ambassador, you're absolutely right. We'll have to wait and watch. But thank you so much for joining us on WION World is One with your insights and your perspective on this. It's been a pleasure speaking to you.
Thank you.